There are initiatives. The Securities and Exchange Commission has a code of corporate governance, which also focuses on those aspects of corruption that have a direct impact on competitiveness as well. So things such as interlocking directorships, declarations of interests in transactions. We do see those initiatives in the private sector in terms of regulatory work. There are other agencies as well in terms of the private sector. We've got the Freedom of Information Act, which has just taken battering in the courts. We have a proposed whistleblower bill, which is something that I'd like to speak about, perhaps if there's another opportunity. And I think these are issues that will assist the private sector to itself rise up to the challenge of joining the anti-corruption war. We know that abroad there are a lot of companies that have their own ethics codes, and I think that this is something that championing. This is something that if we do look at, it would enable the private sector to corruption.
Thank you very much. And I think talking about corporate side of things, when you talk about stock exchange and everything else, sort of big corporations, but there are also very small businesses and medium-sized businesses who this allows corruption as well. And as you speak to us, you can tell us what on a global level, what do you think the challenges are? How do you see how corruption is going in the country? Is it getting better?
Very bad, very bad. And I think although we're concentrating on the private sector, but I'm not sure we can really do that because corruption is so endemic in the public service that you need the public service to define the institutions and laws and systems that will govern the rules applicable to the private sector. So for me, you really have to start with the public sector. If you are appointed minister, the first thing that jumps into people's minds, he's going to be a billionaire. Now, if you don't deal with that perception, you're not going to have any success. So the challenge we have is very manifest. And I think Larry Diamond, one of the world's leading professors who's worked on this, says when you have a situation of endemic corruption, it is a huge challenge. And you can only reverse it if the policymakers are prepared not to pay lip service. I mean, this is now 5 years I worked on the corruption process and it hasn't changed. So we have to find a way to make our votes count. And I'm very happy that we see two major political parties. I'm happy also to see that the other political parties are not in the space. So hopefully our political parties will know that we have choices and that if you do not deliver, we can kick you out. If that is not in the discussion, then there will be a disconnect. I mean, Larry Diamond says, public servant who can use his pen to make billions really care about you if you can't influence or not. So I think that's the perception we need to fight. We need to use 2015 to make a very strong case for the politicians who have acted corruptly. There are so many of them I see. I don't have to start naming them here. But if a guy is not ashamed stealing money to come back and ask for my vote, something is wrong.
Well, thank you very much. And it is clear that the public sector corruption remains a challenge. But you raise a very good point, and that's that we have a wonderful opportunity to react to corruption. We have a tool that was not there. If it was there, but definitely not as potent as it is now, but in terms of democracy. Yeah. So just the reports, those of you who are tracking what's going on in China, in the last 2 days, they picked up the defense chief for corruption. Before they picked him up, they picked up his sons and many other people for staggering sums of money. And today, they brought out information, Chinese time, of one of the general case of China was that whereas in China, it was one of the popular things you might have seen on BBC and watched. The woman who was arrested, the town where she was from, the police go and arrest people, and you have to pay them to get released. For doing nothing, they just arrest you for business. And she complained about it, and she got arrested by the same people she complained about. Beijing, after she served time, and this one in the school said that nothing has happened. And if you research that even more, you find out in China, to be a policeman, to go to police academy, to be an officer, you pay a bribe, I think it's about $17,000. Yes. And if you're from, your father is a senior member of the party or something, you pay a much smaller sum, but you pay a bribe. But they have no recourse. That's what struck me, because they don't have a judiciary, they don't elect their leader. But like it or not, the last couple of years, Nigeria has made great strides when it comes to press freedom, judicial independence, and the quality of the elections. So I see a great opportunity to explain the point. So,
Thank you very much. Glad when Funke started by drawing attention to the corruption in the private sector. CBPI, which is Clean Business Initiative, just give you a quick background, was initiated by a body called HIC, Honorary International Investors Council, headed by Linda Chalker. And this is an advisory body to whoever the president of Nigeria is on how to attract investments into Nigeria. They've been sitting for many years, but then they came to no company, because these are all chief executives of international organizations, international companies, private sector companies, and they advised them privately for 2 days. Now, they came to the conclusion that no company in any country can be seen to have more integrity than the integrity of the country. To be successful, must be part of that system. And therefore, why do we deceive ourselves and give an impression that corruption is only in government? It's a partnership, an unholy partnership in the public sector. And they said all attentions have always been directed at government, saying that it's only government that's corrupt. But then HIC now came and said, let us investigate what's going on. And what's going on is the fact that there are a number of NGOs coming out trying to fight corruption. But because of this mentality that it's only government that is corrupt, government sees each and every one of them as an opposition. That means that it's of government. But if a situation is created where both sides agree, let us fight it together. It's like what Ogbatogo will say. It becomes a situation of it's 1-1, go, let's draw. That kind of situation would create a better environment. So CBPI was born. Unfortunately, the new CEO was introduced. Now, having said
important. A number of corporations, like the one I represent, have very strong ethics and code of conduct practices. And we aspire to be competitive, not because we want to pay something to be competitive, but to be competitive through being an innovator. And we spend a significant amount of money in research and development to be ahead in our business. And it becomes really a losing game if we were to spend so much money in research and development to be technologically ahead, and at the same time, we go and pay something to somebody to get work. Then to me, we are investing twice for the same thing. So we opt to use technology to be able to get a competition. So it tends to, I wouldn't say eliminate, but reduces significantly the push for us to do things untoward. Now, having said that, getting work in an environment is not the only thing you have to confront. You have to deal with getting permits, dealing with the large society, and you, one way or the other, faced with the same challenge. Again, you draw back from the position of the organization where we are willing to take 8 months to get a license rather than to get it in 2 weeks. Because what we found over time is that things can be done, permits can be issued, but it will just take a long time. Alternatively, if you want it in 2 weeks, yes, something has to be done via an agent or whatever you choose to be. So some corporations have also taken the position of not using agents at all. And the corporation that I work for is one of those. And by eliminating the presence of agents, you also eliminate the avenue in which a number of things could be done. And the question then becomes, if you want to take 8 months to get a permit, how do you operate? You have to plan your business cycle. You know when you need a permit. You know how long it will last. You put the process and the time it takes into your plan. And then you'll be able to, sometimes you get delayed, but you'll be able to achieve that. So I think it's ultimately when there is an understanding that everybody loses in the cycle of corruption. Now, and when, whether it's a private business or an individual, appreciates that everybody's losing in the cycle of corruption, then we can take a stand, and by refusing to participate and insisting that things are done the way it should be done, it takes longer, but it's still achievable. But let me also add one more thing, that sometimes we talk about corruption and poverty, like my colleague mentioned, and to me, it comes the other way around. It's poverty that breeds corruption and not the other way around. And when you look at societies where we've pointed out Singapore, Norway, there is one element that's common in those societies. They are not angels, but they have the basic need of life. And because they have that basic need of life, the need to do those things is eliminated. So I believe one of the other areas where, even in the private sector or as a public, we have to ensure that governments, even private companies, help to see that certain basic need of life comes and is available. If I'm able to send my children to good schools and give them proper education, I wouldn't need to hold on a form until somebody gives me some naira before I release the form. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very cogent points there. You talked about everyone losing the cycle of corruption, and if there is that communal awareness, then that could drive that down. I think one of the arguments people tend to have is, how do we have a level playing field? Who goes first? So if I say I'm not going to pay anything, and my competitors are paying, then I stop getting business. Is there a premium that I can extract for that integrity? If there is none, then is the incentive to now engage in corrupt practices get stronger? And one of the things we've seen over the years is, if you look at some European firms, and I'm not holding them up as all angels. We've had a couple of cases that sometimes spectacular, but the very fact that those cases have come up is because those societies have said they have a strong abhorrence to this sort of practices. A lot of African countries and businesses have found it more convenient to do business with China. They know that there's a quality gap, typically, but somewhere in the pricing and the flexibility in court when it comes to corruption, it's been convenient to look eastwards. Mr. Ambassador, what sort of is the experience in this? How do European firms, how do they still compete if you're having Chinese competitors who are not quite playing by the same rules?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, let me first say that you don't change a system from outside. I think it's very important to state that. If you want to change Nigeria, I think only Nigerians can do it. So the World Bank, the IMF, the DFID or EU, we can advise the government or Nigeria as a whole, but the change will be driven by Nigerians themselves. So I very much like the idea of having, for instance, the business community being one of the drivers of change in Nigeria. We are not angels in Europe or in Western countries, but we have a reasonably well-functioning system of rule of law and of governance. And because there is always the threat to be sanctioned, we behave better. It's not that we are better, it's just that we are obliged to behave better. I think it's a very important point. And the interesting thing in the involvement of the business community is not only that they are part of the Nigerian society, it's also part of the supply side of the corruption. We all know that, that story about the demand and the supply of corruption. Now, there is something wrong sometimes. I hear that I am corrupted because you are corrupting me. And the economic costs, all those questions are absolutely key. If I am in charge of the procurement in an hospital, I'm buying an equipment plus 10%. The bribe is 10%, but the cost is not 10%. Maybe the equipment was not needed. I bought the equipment because I knew I would get 10%. So the whole cost is 110%. And I don't buy the good equipment that would save lives. So you have a social cost because your patients are dying because you cannot treat them. Not mentioning the economic cost. The costs are quite important. And I think there are ways and means also to do it. I think lawyers, economists, and politicians are to work together. So we are back to square one. How do you change a system? You put all people around the table and you try to change the system by changing the rules, reinforcing the sanctions. It's not either or. You have to do all the things at the same time. No, I forgot to answer your specific question about China. I would need an hour to explain that. Again, I would really refrain from expressing, that the Chinese are dishonest, we are honest. It's not true at all. It's not true at all. It's the system in Nigeria or more globally in developing countries that it's easier for people to cheat and not to be compliant with the rules. So the Chinese are not more infringing the rules than others. There are a lot of people infringing the rules, and we try to them just by obliging our European investors to publish what they pay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Can we have a second microphone here, please? Just move it to the other end. Doing it better. So. Thank you for this. I think His Excellency spoke. Thank you. Spoke very. Is a good point to segue into solutions and what can be done. I think there's no argument, as we've heard, there's no argument about the fact that there are challenges with corruption in Nigeria. How can we improve that? And one of the arguments I've heard, and today we have someone from the FCC, and I'm hoping at some point I'll hear from her. One of the arguments we heard is that you have a multiplicity of agencies that are fighting the anti-corruption battle, and that they're not cohesive, they're not coordinated, and that some resources are therefore somewhat dissipated. And I would very much like Olisa to speak on this. We have EFCC, ICPC, the department in some other areas, the Attorney Generals, the Ministry of Justice, and they're all sort of looking at the same thing. Is there an argument on how to harmonize the strategy?
And the strategy starts with understanding that you have to have quality institutions, and that you don't have a strategy because you are a nice guy, a nice president, a nice government who obeys the rule of law, but not the next person. Everybody, and I think I like what the ambassador said, the rule of law is the supreme framework. When the rule of law is working, nobody is above it. And when nobody is above it, design institutions. So that's point number one. In Nigeria, we don't have that. And because we don't have that, we had the opportunity of President Obama rigging around the ICPC, which was essentially to combat corruption in public offices function. I don't know why he chose to do that, but that's perhaps in my own personal view why they promote EFCC as a strong institution and promote ICPC as a strong institution, mixed the whole thing up. And we haven't come out of that. So the EFCC is doing three things now, and I think they're doing all of them badly. First, I think that's enough load for them. Because in the UK, you have a strong investigative arm, and that's their function. Then you have the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, that deals with prosecuting. When the EFCC is investigating and prosecuting, it's a challenge. Finally, where is the recovery? What's coming out? How much have they recovered? That's a third function. So for me, I think if we want to start, the strategy would be to really ask the question whether the premier corruption agency in Nigeria is really well equipped to carry out its functions.
Thank you very much. Very candid opinion there. And what he's saying is it's basically a reassessment of things. And we're hoping at the NCCN that one of the debates we'll have in this election season will be about harmonizing law enforcement when it comes to financial. We'll get back to this stuff because I like what I'm hearing. But just to get back into the one of the ideas that CBPI has been talking about, the private sector, getting the private sector members to sign on to a compact that will guide behavior. And that compact, even if it's not the government doing that, would kind of influence how they behave. And on the public sector side, we could see a situation where signing on would become a prerequisite for getting contracts. And that, in which case, there will be a real financial incentive to be compliant. So Chief Ijere, Chief in my village, could you tell us about the Apache principles and how it works and what CBPI is doing in that direction?
If everybody, Partnership Against Corruption is an institution of the World Economic Forum. That's their corruption fighting arm. And we had invited us to a meeting about two months ago. That became a focus. Focus in the sense that they looked at other countries and said the Nigerian one is easier to handle. It's just that we're able to do what His Excellency said earlier. Make examples of people who are known to be corrupt. It's like Nigerian coal mine. Nigerian coal is in the surface. So it's easier to mine than the South African coal that's underground. Our corrupt people are out there, overground. We see them. We live with them. We praise them in our newspapers. We see classmates who did not even do well in school now ride Rolls Royce and they have private jets, and we praise them. So they're out there for all of us to see, unlike other countries. Now, so Pachi said, the first thing you need to do is to start off with a whistle arrangement. Number two, challenge the various legal institutions. And that's why I'm so glad we have two sons here who are fighting it. But I want to say, with due respect, not you as persons, but the institution. The legal profession is perceived by the ordinary man in the street as the place for the rich man. Go and carry out corruption and all the atrocities. You are a governor or whoever you are. Just go in for the right number of sons. In court, there will be about them, and the money you have stolen is what you will use to pay them, and the price is very high. So, unless we are able to, and I want to appeal to those institutions, the Nigerian Bar Association has helped this country over the years. They need to go on the last mile of start talking to themselves. What is good for Nigeria, not necessarily what is good for their bank account. We have that perception that we need to deal with. The issue is that when you start this kind of situation, that's what Pachi said, you start this kind of thing, whistleblowing becomes a lot more interesting. EFCC, yes, I agree. They themselves have almost become politicized. However, they have come up with very high-profile cases that they cannot prosecute themselves, or they cannot sit in judgment over, those ones die there.
Two of the people who have given the president the most headache in the last 1 year will be the central bank, the former central bank governor, and the Speaker of the House, Tambuwal. Both individuals obtained court injunctions, one of them at 4:30 p.m. after landing at an airport, not only to stop himself being arrested, but to stop an ongoing hearing on audited accounts that were audited by respectable audit firms, and both injunctions held. In the case of the Speaker, we're all witnesses. They've gone to court and they've held successfully a process. Clearly, the president's interest was not served in those judgments, and that's what I mean by independence. And the outgoing Chief Justice, and as well as the previous Court of Appeal head, talked about corruption in not just in the bar now, in the judiciary itself. And so they are saying this is not my opinion, that there's a lot of corruption there. And the independence, I think in some ways has been subverted by some of that corruption. The opportunity is there, but there needs to be cleaning to be done. And like Olisa did say, the overall, when I said I desperately wanted Funka Dupere to win, it was for that reason, because I know she's not corruptible. I can't say the same thing for the people who ran. And I don't want to be taken to court for slander, but we know what happened during those elections and what happens. If you go through that process, how can you be possibly independent or serve the country as a whole? Now, but that is on the side. I'm happy to debate this, which is why let's speak organically. And going, Mr. Eke, I'm going to come back to you again. We've had private discussions, and I think one of the challenges that we face is multiple levels of governance. There are vertical issues. I would argue there's vertical dysfunction, and there's also horizontal dysfunction. So if you get over the hurdles of proper elections, and you get over the hurdle of an independent, viable judiciary, you have to tackle the issue of how do I work as a legislator with the executive? How do things work with the federal government? And one of the things we've seen is, for some reason, governance at anything below the federal level has had a pass. So if you look at the elections we've had in this country in the last 1 year, there have been something like 5-6 elections in the last 1 year. 3 of them conducted by the INEC, which is the federal level, namely Anambra State, Osun State, and Ekiti State. Few people who would argue that those elections were not free and fair in terms of observers, but most people who have spoken against it have a political interest. And in 2 of those cases, men lost. Obviously, they didn't want to lose, but they respected that decision. The other 3 have happened at the state level, which were done by state NECs, basically. And you had this in Lagos, you had it and you had that in Nasarawa, in Yobe, and then Kano. So I missed that. That was a tail end. In all these cases, except Nasarawa, 100% of the seats were won by the party of the governor. 100%. The turnout figures are atrocious. The percentage of the votes, incredible, upwards of 90%. But it goes under the radar. And the same thing with education, the same thing with everything. We somehow think this corruption thing is, if you ask a guy on the street, it's somehow at Abuja. They don't recognize the fact that actually your local what you really care about, because corruption is sort of localized. Then if you're angry about what's going on in local government, then your state, then maybe the center. So, Mr. Eke, what is your opinion? How can we change this sort of thinking? How can we get people to be more engaged? Because once you're thinking of Abuja, you're likely to be less engaged. But if it's your local government chairman who is nearby, then you're going to be more engaged.
Thank you. I think the key thing is to educate and enlighten the public to see the fallacy that is public. And while I don't want to get into the political realm, but there are a number of things that is presented to us as a reason why someone is not doing something right. They'll say, oh, it's because he's from the other religion. Or they'll say, oh, it's because he's from the other tribe. And I say, very well and good. I I understand the power of religion and ethnicity in Nigeria, but I don't think it's a problem. And when I want to test whether religion and ethnicity is the problem, I go to the local government. And if we have 700 local governments in Nigeria, at least 650 of them has the same tribe, same religion. But what happens at the larger scale is even worse at those scales. So, and it does not appear as if the Nigerian public is very much conscious of that. Because if they are conscious of that, then they will say, oh, but he's my tribe. We go to the same church or the same mosque. He's doing the same thing. Then, at that point, we can now become cautious of whom we vote for in election. We become politically aware and to go to the streets and oppose things that are wrong. I happened in Egypt in the early 90s when the government increased the price of bread in Jordan for 2 fields, something like 2 kobo. The public poured into the streets for days until the government went backwards. But that sort of consciousness and awareness does not exist in Nigeria. So in the absence of consciousness and awareness by the public, realizing that they have the power to actually challenge the people who are governing them and say, no, we do this. Once that consciousness comes, then we start to move forward. Things you see is that if tomorrow I'm arrested for anything, I'm an Igbo man. A group will come up and boast whatever as challenging the arrest of Mr. Eke. But they never ask, what did Mr. Eke do? Why is he arrested? Right. So that lack of consciousness that we can improve the society by being aware that the people who are governing us at whatever level are not governing in our interest. That's what's missing. And, again, I don't want to go into the political realm, but I will challenge anybody to say, pick any past 10 presidents and ask yourself, who are the common people from their local government that benefited that they were presidents? You can hardly count any. So again, that consciousness is not there, that we are not benefiting from the president. So I believe whether it's NCCN, MBA, other NGOs and so on, there is a need for political awakening, for people to understand that they are being shortchanged by their own people, not somebody else. And that way, become more politically aware. They will look for people who have the ability to start getting close to their interest. And over time, Nigeria will start moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Fair comment. I'm going to get back to you on that. Hold the thought, please. But we'll take the lady just before. She's not spoken on this round. But I'll make a very quick comment there, just to, we're balancing on all sides. We did have few riots when the subsidy was removed, and it was pretty spontaneous, organized but spontaneous, and the government was forced to reverse that. I was a research scholar doing this Arab Spring thing, and one of the things that people don't discuss that I found, not because I'm a genius, but was very clear to me, is that Nigeria's the societies that are not homogeneous, societies that are very fractured in terms of demographics, like religion, tribe, and everything else, tend to find it much harder a certain topic, because exactly what you said is that the person who is corrupt he knows he has tribe and religion to fall to. So if you look at Jordan, you spoke about
tribe. There's something similar to that in Nigeria as well, but nobody knows about it. If people know that if we report corruption, we will be protected, we won't lose our jobs, we won't be intimidated, we won't be harassed by the police, we won't be transferred, they will come out and report. When the chief judge, senior lawyers corrupt the judiciary, I expected him to name names. He didn't. Why not? And that's my position. That's what we need to get that whistleblower bill enacted. And then we need to educate the people that this is what you need.
Thank you so much. That takes a lot of candor. And I think at the NCCN, one of the frustrations we have, but we believe optimistically that it's because it's an election year. But if you look at the last couple of years and look at the legislative actions of the House, it's been really very poor. They've focused on culturally charged things like gay marriage bill that has no real benefit for the country. And they've left important things like this bill you spoke about, like the PIB that takes out corruption in the energy sector. They've not touched it. And the public doesn't hold them accountable to that. The public is blinded by the idea of this tribe and religion and who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And we would move very quickly because we're quickly running out of time. So we'll see if we can do one more circle. We'll go to Olisa to himself. I mean, recently he almost came to fist-offs with
I didn't actually.
in the newspapers. And I'm giving you a size. Well, the size of both of you, I was. But I think what was frustrating for him there, and I'm not preempting him, maybe it's what he will talk about. This is one country where I was a banker for a couple of decades, and I know when we complain about banks not lending money and banks not doing that, it's mainly because there's no faith in the judicial system. So you have to wrap yourself around the way a guy owes you money, he signed to take money, he borrows money, but he knows that you can't, he's doing you a favor paying you back. So he goes to court, and then the court now turns around. One of the most spectacular cases in Nigeria's history was when I was at UBA. We bought about a bank called UBA, met with STB, and there was a case going through the courts. And the gentleman, and I hope I'm not going to be sued, but he owed the bank, he borrowed money from the bank, didn't pay it back. The bank tried to get their money back. He went to court to block it. And it was something like $1 million back in the firm days. He claimed he never took the got testimonies from everyone that disbursed it. Even the LC openers in the UK came in. In the end, the Supreme Court awarded an 8.7 billion naira judgment against us.
BTL.
Yeah, for owing that money. And I kept telling my people that this could happen, but it was unthinkable because the facts were there, but it happened. So the faith in the judiciary is one thing, allowing it to be independent as it is now apparently, but how do we restore that faith?
Yeah, I will stay on politically concerned because that's important. When I was president of the association, we put in about 35 key legislation. I'm not sure any has passed. And that's not possible when National Assembly is not responsive to those who put them there. It's very important. Guys do not care. The typical Nigerian politician is not interested. And when I was a member of the national conference, boy oh boy, it was very clear to me on the first day that it is questionable if there is a country called Nigeria. And if we keep running from that, we're not going to progress. So look, I'm from Onitsha. If my brother and he steals, I'm not going to say a word. That's the truth. On to Dr. Eke. I won't say anything. We compete at the national level because it's nobody's land. All those guys who come to Abuja have no difference in tribe, tongue, and which other one? Tribe, tongue, and religion. They are united by money. Let's face it. So let's not kid ourselves. So if you are talking about this, the NBA is not going to succeed in fighting the war. Neither will all of these NGOs put together unless we deal with the issue of the national conference. We failed to manage diversity properly. We failed to manage it, and that's the challenge. Therefore, nobody is interested. If there's a big issue now, it will become tribalized. And there's no national energy. And if there's no national energy, you can't fight corruption. Period. You can't. So what I think we need to do... Yeah, well, that's what we said at the national conference. We said that Nigeria sits across 6 geopolitical tripods, spheres. The war between those who wanted regionalism and states as the federating unit was a problem. And I could see on that first day, it was a challenge. You remember Lamido Adamawa? It was a big war. He said he doesn't belong to Nigeria. He will go back to Cameroon. I decided not to take any money from because I knew it would fail. And the failure of the national conference is the reason for the failure of Nigeria. So if we don't address those conceptual underlying problems, we're going nowhere.
What can we do? We cannot give up. No,
Well, I tried.
I think to be fair to Olisa, he's raised a very valid point, and I think what I would say, call me an inveterate optimist, but what I would say is the lack of strong nationalism in Nigeria is in itself a reflection of the kind of leadership we've been saddled with over the life of Nigeria. If you go back to our history, or even today, if you go to the most micro level, go into some of the, what they call face me, I face you, Nigeria, tribe has a much lower significance than what we do. And it's not unusual. The big differences, like the ambassador is from a country where you have two big tribes and almost warring sometimes. But the differences, whereas a lot of the disagreement is actually at the lower level, and the politicians or the elite are wise enough to sort of, they make this, but they never inflame, they never make incendiary comments and things of that nature. One or two would, but typically the mainstream would restrain from that. We've had the unfortunate experience where our elite exploited, rather than solve that. And we could debate that, and it would be great to do it. What I would really like to do is to take two very quick comments, three quick, and then we would open questions that have been coming in from social media, and then we have members of the press here who are the real audience we have today. And let me also thank everyone who is covering this today. We have a live stream on our website. We have streaming on ITV. We have, which is an internet TV. We have streaming coverage from Channels TV. Someone is there from there as well. And thank you for staying with us. So we'll just take some quick comments by way of rounding. I'll take the ambassador, AK, and then Chibijere, and then we'll take it from there. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to come back on this question of proliferation of agencies. I mentioned that we need some economic research on corruption, and we have to study the market of the corruption. And sometimes it's not good. So one could define corruption as a discretionary power of someone who is with a monopoly or an so sometimes, and without account within the corruption. I just take an example. If you can clear your goods in Tinkan or in Apapa, isn't it better than having to go to one custom office only? If you give the monopoly to issue passports, is it good? I don't think so. It's better to have the possibility of having your passport issued in also in Lagos, and why not in all capitals of all states. So sometimes it's, and I know I'm a bit provocative there, but it's better to have 10 roadblocks on the road than only one, because the policemen, they know that to a certain extent they have to reduce the level of the bribe they are asking for. I know there are limits to this reasoning because
large market size and people who are going to move into middle class, because the people who are poor are some 60 million less than was previously thought before this year. So there are many good reasons to come in here as well. Just before I go to Mr. Ake, I can't help but commenting on this. There's competition going on in the ports. It's just unfortunate that it's unofficial. So when we had the policy that I think was somewhat, I would say misguided, but badly implemented to support rice, what happened was the rice importation to Nigeria dropped dramatically, and almost by the same symmetry, same amount, it increased for Benin Republic imports. Now, if you're familiar with Benin Republic, the Francophone guys don't eat parboiled rice. They eat more the basmati kind of rice. So it's not been eaten in Benin Republic, but the same amount, more than they ever ate for all the years before, is coming in. So obviously it's been smuggled in. So you need to take away the conformity of the tariffs and everything else, and then you can solve this, that sort of corrupt behavior happens unintended consequence. Mr. Eke, Dr. Eke.
Thank you. I think I would round up and just commenting. Yes, in terms of the private sector, again, the private sector can help ensuring a corruption-free society in Nigeria is largely through self-regulation. With the right conduct and code of ethics, and not a piece of paper on the wall, but walking the talk. That will go a long way. And even in some circumstances where you find, I would say, a loophole or a non-defined scenario on how something can be, when you decide to uphold what is right, you can also decide for yourself how to do that. I can give a small example. The law permits a customs controller to release a goods before you have completed the entire process of clearance under a regime called a pre-release. Law does not define any fee for you to do that. So ideally, that's a process that you go through at no fees. Now, if you're a company and your custom clearing agent comes to you and say, I spent ₦1 million to do the pre-release, you should ask, why did you spend ₦1 million to do the pre-release? Because there is no fee for the pre-release. If you should pay a custom agent for the pre-release, you should be paying them something equivalent to the 2 days of work or the 3 days of work they did, which could amount to maybe 75,000 naira for the pre-release. Now, if you go ahead and pay them ₦1 million or more, you're obviously funding something else. So even in the absence of a or whatever you call it, self-regulation, a company, it's a way to ensure that things are being done properly. Now, in terms of the larger society, something that most of my colleagues here have mentioned, it's accountability. You know, there are no angels on earth, but when you have a system of accountability, and there's one element of accountability where I would like to see an advocacy and hopefully a legislation on, is in the area of minimum sentences. What you see in Nigeria is even when we go through the process investigating, you come up with a sentence that's laughable vis-a-vis the crime that supposedly somebody has committed for. So if we were to have minimum sentences as part of our law, then even if the criminal is my son and I'm the judge, my hands are tied. I can get 2 weeks prison because the law says the minimum sentence for that crime is 5 years imprisonment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very cogent point. Minimum sentencing, and I think when you were speaking, one of the very public cases was the pension funds. Maybe you heard about that. We're on a state where a judge convicted a young man to, I don't know how many, for stealing a fowl, and then his friend's son to an air conditioner, and they gave him, he sentenced him, he gave him some. So that very fair point. Chief Ijoriwe, thank you again. I know you have to depart very soon anyway. Thank you for us. You want to give your final comments on this?
Yes, I want us to all to understand. A lot has been said about corruption. I'm glad about the kind of views expressed so far, but we must not lose sight of the fact that there are two main types of corruption. The one of need, which one of us said is encouraged by the level of poverty need. But the one that is most devastating is the corruption of greed. We do already have, and a lot is a partnership between the private and the public sector. And driving the private sector to continue doing what they were doing. Remember I said no company can have more integrity than the country in which it operates. Be you Schlumberger, be you MTN, all of us. Unless you are able to change that perception out there, you will never be looking, you'll never be smelling like a rose. The fear that they have is this one, that if we don't do it, our competitors will do it. Which means that for you to have remained in business, you are doing it. Once we understand that, this one of, it's not, we have an entire where this is not done, it's not true. You operate with the bigger society. We are all guilty. Nobody, no big company, one major oil company that told us how extensive their system is. But the truth is that you are making money. How are you making money in this difficult society where everybody is asking? If you were not paying, you would have packed and you have gone. I want to also point out that we are going into now through CBPI is that the current minister has asked that we should work out the modalities on how to establish a white register. That white register is those companies who have declared that they will disclose, in fact, adopt what His Excellency just now, that the EU countries have accepted the ability of every company. We're bringing it in here. So those companies will disclose. If you are forced to pay a bribe, you will put it in there. But once that white list is out, there's a situation where only those companies that have been qualified to be in the white list can go on for major governments. And this minister is really, he wants that done. This was driven by the report that we received 2 weeks ago that they were going to come up with a list of 100 companies, yes, in Nigeria. And this was now introduced and said, the next list that's going to come out, those people must be qualified to be on this white list. You start from there. And I want to appeal to the list and the entire private sector. Have hope in the future. Let us not be talking about how bad things are, Let's start talking about how do we improve things. It can be improved. Nobody out there can help us improve it. Nigeria has a situation where less than 1% of the population controls over 85% of the wealth. So we have over 90% of our people don't have the kind of say that you and I have. If we lead them properly, corruption will start going down. So we find reasons for not leading them by saying the system is corrupt. We are the ones that are corrupt. The poor man down there, he does not see that as corruption. You go into a toilet, the guy starts greeting you over and over. It's a way of getting you to put your hand and give him some. And maybe he will splash water on me if I don't give him. All right, because when you now check, what does he earn vis-a-vis what does his company that employed him earn? That's a corruption of need. So we need to now research ourselves. And I think that's where I will stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So the panelists have spoken. I'm going to...
I want to also look at which one I'm going to talk about again, the oil sector, the banking also, and all the things that we've recorded. All of you know the number of people we sent to jail, chief executives that were sent to jail, and all of that. But EFCC is not doing all of those challenges. We have huge challenges. And one of the challenges, the two SAN have mentioned it clearly. What are the lawyers doing? The big ones and the small ones. They are also buying and receiving. So what do? We also talk about the whistleblowing and all of that, asset forfeiture bill and all the bills that have been sent to National Assembly, still waiting. And some of the challenges also EFCC is facing is looking at us negatively. It's a challenge. Because whatever, I want to take the opinion of, forgive me, I've forgotten your name, that look, we shouldn't just be talking of the negative. we should also look at what is positive about what we are doing. Because we kept emphasizing on the negative and not looking at the way out. How can these things change? Because we are also trying our possible best to educate the people on how to report corruption. We've gone so much in the area of sensitizing Nigerians, even the private sectors. Just like also, we look at some of the government, look at the NGOs as their enemies. They don't want to collaborate in the area of fighting corruption. We have a huge problem, challenges that everybody knows. How are the people supporting EFCC to ensure that we do our work? What of the government, like you said? You just came from the Constitutional Conference. What is the challenge? The big top, how are they backing us to ensure that we do what we ought to do? The political will, so to say. So you see, it's a whole lot of challenges. And I want to appreciate everything every one of us is doing right now to ensure that we fight corruption and nip it at the bud. Thank you very much. We are looking forward to doing much more than what we are doing now. And somebody said it's only Bode George, Cecilia Ebru, Lucky Benedict, and the rest of them, Balogun and the rest of them. We've not done so much. But with the cooperation of the judiciary, we should be able to do better. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you. So I'll just appeal to their comments. She had a special case, to as much if you can, 1 minute, and then we'll move on. And Madam, thank you very much, because I know a lot of people don't realize that people have paid political and physical prizes for being in law enforcement. We all know that your former boss big prize for doing what he did. So well done.
Hello. One of the key reasons I accepted to take on this job is because we really have to start looking at this dynamic from a different perspective. We need to bring some innovative, fresh thinking to the table. And a great starting point has to be to, first of all, I'm hearing what everybody is saying. For instance, areas we're going to be looking at is definitely the sort of structure that passes bills in. But again, you've got to have the research to back it. The Whistleblower Act would be part of CBPI's medium-term strategy. Currently, right now, we're working with Deloitte Consulting to frame the first 5 years. But typically, we do have a cultural problem in Nigeria. We have a cultural dynamic. Men should not be snitches. In Ghana, for instance, I hear what everybody's saying about the ECOWAS, but in Ghana, it's called people are abused, okra mouth, and so forth. I'm not very sure that it's going to be quite that well taken on immediately. But again, fresh perspectives, fresh dynamics in how we're going to go about it. Maybe, for instance, incorporated blower theme at the airports. That was one of the recent things we just came up with like last week. Because foreigners are more likely to blow the whistle, because especially if they're potential investors coming into the country, than the Nigerians who it affects even more. So if you've passed through the airport, blasted with lots of messages, giving you a website where you can complain, you can sort of get things started in that way. But I do agree, it has to be a holistic thing. But please, I must really keep going back to this issue of the rule of law as well. And I'm glad, and sooner or later, I would come along and speak to you. Like I said, I'm only like in the saddle. But investment and corruption, a lot of why it's not being challenged is because feel that there's nothing that they can do about it. One key starting look at measurement, research. How on earth are we going to, in the future, be able to assess how far we've gone? Because you've got your corruption index and all of that, but typically all they do is they measure the supply side and they measure public sector. They haven't been measuring the private sector. So things like KPIs, ratings, assessments, things like that. So I'm going to very soon be speaking to the OECDs and lots of other bodies to help us out with things like that. I can go on and on and on, but just to give you some kind of idea of what the CBPI is going to be doing. And there will be a lot of focus and attention on the government. I spoke to my chairman the other day, and I said, look, if the government really wants to put its money where its mouth is, they should dedicate to us a budget for publishing on a weekly basis what they pay, who they pay to, etc., etc. I'll sort of rest my case there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we
I had wanted not to really pass a comment to EFCC yet. You've had 773 cases, very few convictions. I do agree and I understand and appreciate some of it has to do a little bit with the rule of law. But I think let's start a conversation offline because I'm not really sure where your teeth are right now.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think you can see we're very lucky to have Yetunde with us. She flew in this morning at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., barely slept, and she's to make this. It's a new kind of Nigeria we're in. I would not want to back and forth between the EFCC and her. We can take that offline. We really want to get everyone else here to have some sort of input. So again, I would appeal 1 minute. If you have 1 minute, and then we'll stay. Prof, we're going to get to you, and you deserve a very special introduction. We'll get to you eventually. Okay. So, 1 quick minute, and then we can get a few questions in, and then we'll get to Prof.
Okay. I think thing probably starts with what I call contract. What is our understanding between what the government agrees and what the people, and to have social contract, the substance or the definitions involved that said is very understanding of what corruption is. Do we have a shared definition of what it is? And if we do not, why not? Does it mean we have to break this thing down to a bit more, rather than, you did mention local government, sir, but is it more something a bit more cultural? The issue that is absent, or the critical word, is accountability. Are we ready to answer questions for response given? And how do we change that narrative and make it popular, whether you are in the east or south, north or west? Responsibilities are given. Are we ready to answer the questions? In Europe,
there's a lot of greed, a lot of impunity that defies every sense. I just don't know how to describe it. But I know that by virtue of my job, I interact with the high and mighty and then the low too. I don't know, how are we going to handle corruption in the private sector? When you talk about corporate governance, you give a man the liberty to fix his salaries and allowances. If in my office you ask me to fix my allowances and my salaries, I'm sure I'll make myself comfortable. Some of these private institutions, the managing directors, they manipulate all these things, and they have the capacity and the liberty to fix their allowances and their salaries. And then when you look at what they earn every month, and all of us buy in the same, it's terrible. So I have seen some of them instituting corruption in the high places. You have issues in court where a bank are indicted for forgery, outright forgery. It's reported to the central bank, they wouldn't do anything. You report to their own banks, they wouldn't do anything. They would rather want to go to cash and carry and take something. That is corruption in the high places. So we have to look deeply into that. I just want to know the people, whistleblowers act that well. All these things, I don't know that they will go a long way. The point here I want to raise is that we need to begin to look at enforcing our laws, our rules. I think we have enough laws and rules to begin with. We can enforce them, and by the time these big men are punished, like somebody in the panel, when all these big men are captured and punished up, the problem we have presently is that everybody is untouchable. And people don't do their job. Sincerely speaking, I'm sorry to take a little of your time. I feel so that in my street, a local government chairman has the money allocated to him to tar the street. He wouldn't do it. He pockets it and everybody turns out and I'm good as if nothing is happening. It's saddening. Whereas you can still do it and have some change for yourself. Nobody will complain, even if it is done haphazardly. But this one is nobody does anything, and campaign time is here. Everybody's vote and all. It's sad. Thank you,
very much. At least the local government man is not calling press conferences to criticize the president on corruption, which is what they do at a slightly higher level. We'll take a question from social media. Can you read out, because we're running out of time, we'll just take 2 more questions, and then we'll hear from Prof and we go. Can we get that? Can you read out the comment?
Yeah. From social media we have, what's the next step? Who implements the new legislation, and what's the role of the citizens?
What's the next step?
Who
Next
implements?
steps after this, okay? And then who implements? Okay,
And what's the role of the citizens?
Role of citizens. Okay, great. And you have a question? Can we just take your question quickly, sir?
Okay, my question is to Ambassador Mitchell Arion. During the Euro crisis, one of the crisis countries, Greece, there's this journalist, Kostas Vaxivanis, that published names of those that were involved in tax evasions and all that. I want to ask if Greece is an example of a country that had, because they took him to court, but he was acquitted doing his job.
We all know about the Ferrari swimming pools. In Greece, they have a tax for luxury cars, and there are 5 Ferraris. But in reality, there are 2,000 or whatever. And then the swimming pools, they cover it with glass-like things because a helicopter, they could see the swimming pools. And they were trying to avoid the swimming pool tax. But that's just a side comment. So thank you. So we're taking that, and we'll now, you have a question? Very, very quickly, sir. Not a comment, a question, but go on.
Hi, yes, my name is Babatunde Pega, EMC3 Global. I just wanted to ask, as the legal framework we've heard today has been very incisive and interesting, but how do you feel the church plays a part in, you think of the mosque, do you think they have a part to play in fighting corruption? Because that's where I will say most of the people in Nigeria go. So a community thing.
All right, so we'll take those questions, and I very quickly want to introduce Professor Austin Esogwe, who was a professor emeritus at Georgia Tech. If you guys know what of them, but we respect him. Happy that he serves on our council. He is widely governments across the country, across the world, and within America where he resides. So, Professor, thank you for being with us. Do you want to say a quick word? Because I know you have opinions on this issue of corruption to all of us.
Thank you very much, Chika. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I was somewhat delayed in making my entry here, but obviously we have had a very charged morning from such a distinguished panel, and even the audience listening to the comments and some of the questions raised seem to have a reasonably good hold on the issue. I want to begin by saying that this is something that is very dear to me. It's something able, but it's something that is quite pervasive to begin with. We're not just making an indictment on Nigeria alone. It's a very pervasive issue. There's a in the US, even people who were supposedly described as angels before they went to US Congress. If you don't know them, you're not close to them, you don't imagine that they're still angels. But if you're close to them, then you begin to hear some stories, and they're not really stories, they're facts in terms of what they have done or what they've been part of. Then you begin to feel, say, wow, these people are involved in this. And particularly in the US, they said, if somebody follows you 24/7, they're bound to find doing something. The third one is what people jokingly say, there are 10 commandments, but the 11th commandment is thou shalt not be found. Because if you are found, then your guilt is magnified. So it brings me straight to the issue this young lady raised earlier, the importance and the criticality of getting factual data. And that cannot be factual, objective data. that cannot be attained without good inquiry, which is, in sort of research. You can document this. The other one is the issue not only tracking. It's almost similar to the area of security. Very similar. It says security is everybody's business. This issue is everybody's business. You will say that almost everybody is corrupt, and is corrupt to a degree. That everybody should be involved in the act of fighting corruption. Interested in the comment made by, I think, Bakova, Attorney Bakova, with regards to the national conference. And you wound up saying that it was a failure. Now, something should have resulted from it in terms of there should be lessons learned from it. One of which would be at least the issue of corruption was raised. And what action are you going to take? We comment on this, we have opinions, but what are we going to really do? The issue of enforcement is very important. Can we enforce any of the laws that we have on the table? Really enforce them. And it goes all the way to the judiciary where they don't fail us. Unlike what they did, for example, with my former governor, who was found innocent in how many charges they leveled against him, only to be found guilty in the United Kingdom. Now, you shame people when they do stuff like that. And the judiciary should be shamed, to a point where they should have no credibility in the country. We're still guilty to some degree. So we should begin to enforce it, and we can start doing it ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we're really tight on time because we have back-to-back events. Some of the members are going off to Bloomberg, and then we have been interviewed here by Bloomberg, and then CNBC. We have a panel that starts at 1 o'clock. So I'll just split the members. If you could very the questions that were raised specifically, one was very specific for Ambassador Oran, and could you remember the question? Could you answer that?
A good illustration of, I would say, European solidarity. We could have decided to work collectively. The banking system in Europe is very much integrated. So the Greek banking crisis had an impact on all banks in Europe, and altogether, it was, each and every Greek was asked to make a contribution. The poor and the rich, not only the poorest ones, not only the richest one, everybody. And the real challenge was to remain equitable and to keep some equity. The richest people had to contribute more than the poorest ones, but the number of poor is much higher than the number of rich. So taxing Bentleys and Rolls-Royce also here in Nigeria, well, it's nice. It's a good, it's a flagship program. It displays that you are serious, but the bottom of the program is much bigger. And on the last point, I just want to recall everyone that yes, there was an EU solidarity, but there was also a bilateral cooperation between Greece and, for instance, Cyprus. Imagine Cyprus, an island in the Mediterranean Sea, where they decided, they had exactly in Greece, they decided on a Sunday to close all the banks. On Monday, all of $10,000, which is nothing, compared with the average revenue of people. All accounts above 10,000 were taxed, were imposed a tax of, I think, 35%, right? So that was really strong as an answer, but that was the only way to make it relatively equitable, to avoid imposing the tax to the poorest ones below 10,000, but above they contributed 40%. So it was one measure in a very long list of the other measures that were taken collectively. So mutualization is probably the response.
Thank you very much. Some on charitable commentators will say that in the case of Cyprus, it was designed against the Russians. But that's a different story. One of the questions was about the role of religious organizations in this. And I would very quickly, I want Chief Ijewere to take a stab at that. I'm sure we all have views today on religious organizations. So,
I think many cases, especially the churches, not as much in the mosques. A number of churches have lost the essence of religion. They have become businesses, and once you wear the cloak of business, you must be ready to do and pay and carry out the responsibility of businesses like paying your taxes. I believe that any organization, by whatever name you call them, and where they make profit and make some people unfairly rich because they are able to influence others, they should pay those taxes. People are free to contribute to them, but at the same time, they too must contribute to society. I quickly want to, the gentleman from The Guardian who said he's very upset and so on. I said earlier, all of us are upset, but the newspapers still have a unique position. They are the ones that praise all these people to the high heavens. They praise them and are upset. Go back to your system, tell your colleagues and say, let us now start asking, where did you get your money? Anybody that's ashamed to tell you or is afraid to tell you where he got his money, he must have got it by crooked means. Let it be visible. That's the kind of thing. So we start the charge, not by others. So don't cry again, eh? Get on with it.
So question, and then we would call it. I would pass this to, because I know he's not worried about whose ox is God, to Olisa. Should the revolution start from within the judiciary?
No. The revolution should start with us taking advantage of 2015 and how can we make it an issue. I'm not going to vote for because I don't hear what you're saying about the war on corruption. That, I think, is where the battle should be engaged.
Thank you. So we would come to, there was a social media question on what next steps will be taken. And I think for this, we're going to come up with something we're going to distribute to the public. For the larger issue of corruption, like Olisa said, 20 gender setting opportunity. One of the things we've done at NCCN, and we've been meeting with the media houses, is setting an agenda that we want every presidential candidate to sign on to. And if the public and the media, which is why we're visiting them, can hold them accountable to that agenda, then we'll take a very good first step. Because one of the wonderful things that happened in Kenya, I'm not in the habit of comparing small countries to Nigeria, but one of the things that happened in Kenya was when they had the election last year, Uhuru Kenyatta, and we were both campaigning at who was implementing their Vision 2030, which is sort of a competitiveness agenda. We need to have politicians make that commitment, and we can hold them to it, that they're going to tackle, amongst other things, corruption. So thank you very much for coming out here. We're going to call it a day at this point. And remember what has been said again, we can only change from within. Everyone in judiciary is a Nigerian. Everyone in the police, last time I checked, is a Nigerian. Everyone who is in the government is a Nigerian. We can't expect it to be any different if we don't, as a society, begin to, shun people who have made money from corruption, to give an incentive for people who decide not to be corrupt. Thank you very much indeed. Have a nice day. And let me thank my sponsors again before I forget, so they don't get angry. And MTN, the Tony Elumelu Foundation, thank you very much for your sponsorship. And Computer Warehouse, sorry, I didn't see anyone from there, so. So you can go with me. Yes.